સુનામે.
શું આપને સાંભળીએ છીએ?
Tiny Sash.
I'd like to welcome you this evening. My name is Rebecca Carlton, and I am the artist that created the piece, Are We Listening? What you were just listening to were different folks speaking in their mother tongue, Are We Listening? And I have 76 different recordings of mother tongue speakers. My dream and my hope is to get a representative from all 6,910 languages to record for me, so that it really is an inclusive recording of someone from every one of our world languages. Many of you have been here. Many of you, this is your very first time. I'm just going to briefly talk a little bit about the piece before we move forward. This is an art installation piece. It is also a social sculpture. And my intent for the piece, since it's called Are We Listening, is to really bring our community together and ask one another, are we listening? When we listen, we also have a responsibility for speaking. And so if we sit silently and just listen to someone, we're cheating them out of hearing what you have to say. The birds are in pairs, and that's intentional because we can't listen if there's someone else that's not with us. We can't speak if we don't have someone to talk with. And so that's very intentional. The piece, 7 years ago, I read an article where there were almost 7,000 world languages. If you've been here before, you've heard me say that gave me great pause. I could not believe that. I thought maybe there were 600 different languages. And I started thinking, how do we communicate with one another? How do we live on this planet together? How do we learn, love, compromise, prevent war, share our ideals, our dreams, our families, allow everyone to be safe, listen to the land? There's so many layers of Are We Listening and the intention of this piece. The more I discovered is that the languages, just like a plant or an animal, become endangered, threatened first, endangered, and then extinct. By the time we reach 2100, more than half of our languages will become extinct. And if you read last week on the news where there was a landslide in Papua New Guinea, 2,000 people were killed. The country of Papua New Guinea is the size of California. There's 849 languages in that country alone. So those language communities may range from several hundred speakers to several thousand speakers. And so again, that gave me pause. I'm like, is this whole community gone? Is their language gone, their traditions, their cultures, their community? Is every member now extinct? And so my intention of creating this piece was just to give an awareness, to honor, to show respect, and maybe plant a seed within the rest of the world to start thinking about our community in a much larger, broader sense. I didn't mean to talk so much. I have a tendency of really talking a lot. So, if you want to know more about the piece, there is my statement on the wall, and I'm happy to talk with you about it later. So, next I'm going to introduce our panel, who has so graciously given of their time and their expertise to share with us their practice as artist-writers. So, welcome to the Listening to Door County Artists series of panel conversations. On Tuesday evenings during the month of May, and now, I can't believe it, June, you are invited to sit and listen to almost 50 of Door County's resident artists. These very enlightening conversations are focused on the artists, giving each an opportunity to talk about their practice and for our community to listen. Each event will focus on artists in specific mediums. We've already heard from musicians, visual artists, and actors. This evening are writers. Upcoming will be filmmakers and women visual artists. In our geographically tiny part of the world, how have so many forces converged to create and sustain such a curious creative community? Thank you for joining us and to learn about some of the artists who have planted seeds and established roots in our Door County artistic community. Our panel conversation celebrates the following story weavers of Door County. The writers' panel conversation will be moderated by journalist Debra Fitzgerald. She is the editor of the Peninsula Pulse and lover of, and I quote, writing the stories of real people, unquote. The accomplished panel members are Anne Heyse. She's a multi-genre writer of fiction and children's books, and she is a member of Right On Door County. Jeanne Kuhns, singer-songwriter and vibrant musical performer with 7 released CDs. Erika Nelson is a nonfiction writer and professional counselor. I'm sorry. No, I'm not done yet. With a focus on trauma and PTSD. Thank you, Erika. Jeanne Kuhns, novelist, Hal Prize winner, and is the founding member of the Door County Authors Collective. And Alessandra Simmons Rolffs is a poet, freelance writer, editor, and executive director of Gathering Ground on Washington Island. I was so brief in describing each of them. Their experience is just so much longer than I could ever have listed or shared with you this evening. So please follow them, look them up, and find out more about them. And they'll tell us more tonight. Please join us in listening to their stories.
Thank you. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Rebecca. It's truly amazing what you've assembled here and what you have assembled since you've assembled this. I don't know how many people you've actually reached in Door County. Do you know?
I think there's been almost 800 people who have come through the door.
800 people. And is that including all of the panels that you have assembled? It's truly a remarkable thing that you've been doing and gathering so many different people together to have these conversations. I was fortunate to participate in one prior to this, and that was with high school students, so much more difficult. They were such fun, but at the beginning they were very quiet, and once you actually got into their heads, it was amazing what was there. You might think that all they do is check their social media feeds, and that's about as deep as it goes. Well, these kids, these juniors and seniors in high school, I think there was a freshman and a sophomore, they're thinking about global problems. They're thinking about how we have essentially kind of messed up the world and what they're going to be doing with it afterwards. So thank you for giving us that opportunity to hear from those students. And this is kind of a shameless plug, but in Friday's newspaper, we are showcasing another offshoot of this exhibit, and that is the exhibit that is at the Door County Auditorium that Vinnie Shomo pulled together with 380 students from all 5 school districts. 16 of those students, seniors and juniors at Gibraltar, also drew, painted, used mixed media for an issue that is important to them. These drawings, these mixed media paintings and art are amazing. We'll have them on the cover of the paper, on the cover of the art section, and we have a landing page for them as well. Again, 16 different students, and only 3 of the issues were the same. It was just astonishing, the breadth and depth We wouldn't know that if it were not for Rebecca. So thank you again for allowing us to have these conversations. Woo! So now I'll stop talking, or I'll just ask a couple of questions. So the format will be, I will be messing up the microphone. I will be asking each of you a couple of questions. These are questions that you self-selected and then I selected based upon your self-selections. So we will have 2 questions each for each one of you, and that will be the first part of this. So are we ready? Yes? All right. Here we go. We're going to start with Anne. And not just because you were sitting right next to me. So Anne, questions for you. What are the biggest problems facing writers today?
Well, I think one worry for writers is whether people are going to keep reading. I was watching a little segment on Jimmy Fallon, and he was scoffing at people that were readers. And I think of my own children, my sons, who are in their 30s, and they don't read books. And so that's a worry for us as writers. Our society is wanting snippets, and they're wanting condensed versions, and they'd rather watch the movie of a book instead of read the book. So that's always something I think that concerns us. I believe in the power of words. I think not only words are beautiful, but I think they're powerful. They make us think and imagine and dream, and there's so much good that words can do, but if people aren't reading them, that's not only sad, but a worrisome trend. And I think AI comes into that worry. What happens if machines are now writing our books and logarithms are writing our essays? Are we losing the voices of value from the writers? And I think one other, just quickly, I think researchers have shown for years that people who read are more empathetic. I was a high school teacher for years, and I saw this in my own experience, that kids who read and got themselves into the perspective of other, characters in books, it helps us all be empathetic to read and to put ourselves into the shoes of other people. And I think if there's one thing we really need in our society, it's empathy and the ability to look at the world from other people's point of view. So I guess those are some of my concerns.
So it's 2 questions per person, but I do get follow-up questions. So that makes it more. It's kind of interesting that you say a falling off of readership would be the biggest concern for a writer, obviously. How do you know that people are reading you now or in the past? And have you noticed a difference? How do you connect with your readers to know if it's actually changing?
Well, I think every writer loves it when they get feedback and they hear from somebody who's read the book. I had the privilege of going to talk to book clubs in Door County after my book came out. I wrote a book of historical fiction set in Door County, and it was just delightful to go to book clubs and hear feedback. And these characters that I had created in my head, they were very real to me. I can see what they look like, and I can hear what they say, what their voices sound like, but to hear readers have arguments about, oh no, my character wouldn't have done that, and she wouldn't have done this, and of course, don't you remember when she did that? I mean, it was delightful that those characters had come alive for other people as well. So the feedback is always wonderful. If you, and you know, I think a lot of us write and we never hear feedback. So for most of us, it's an added bonus if we hear back.
How can writers help a community? And then the second part, how do writers help our Door County community?
I think writers can be the conscience of a culture. I think we can point out, shine a spotlight on certain issues. I think some writers write to persuade and some writers write to influence, but I think a lot of us just write with a keen perspective that might hopefully ask our readers questions, get them to think about something in a different way. And again, I think empathy, that's how we can help community as a whole. I think in Door County we have a lovely, writers as a whole are very supportive people. And I think the writers in Door County can really help other people in Door County tell their stories. I think with Write on Door County, we offer classes and workshops and opportunities for people to tell their stories and write their stories. And I think the writers here are supportive and encouraging, and I hope that that is going to encourage other people to write their stories and tell their stories.
Thank you, Anne. Jeannie, how does songwriting and performing those songs create community?
Well, by its very nature, when you sing a song to a group of people, it's a shared experience, and it creates an instant community of people who are having a reaction to something. They all may be having different reactions, but they're one in the fact that they're experiencing something at the same time. So there's kind of like little instant communities that get made every time someone does a concert. Even if you don't do an official concert and you're sitting outside under a gazebo singing in the summer and people are walking by all day long in front of you, every now and then you'll get a little group of people that will sit in front of you and they'll attach themselves to your songs. And that's an instant baby community. And then the other way that I think we create communities is we pay attention to our communities and we see what's going on in them. We see what hurts, what's aching, what's needed to be said. And we tell people's stories. You know, I love to write a song about somebody's life and point out the things that they did that touched other people, or momentous things that they overcame and how they grew and how it touched me. And then, so bringing in members of the community into my writing experience has been really wonderful for me because I learn. And then when you present a song to somebody that didn't know you were going to write a song about them, it's interesting to see how they respond to it. And most of the people I've written songs about are deceased, so they don't really tell me what they think. But every now and then I write a song for somebody that isn't, and it's always really interesting to see how they respond to it. So I think it's just a coming together. Also, one of the things I did as a songwriter was I decided many years ago, almost 20 years ago, that I wanted to introduce Door County to original singer-songwriter music. It wasn't that big of a deal back then. It was a lot of covers and a few singer-songwriter things. A lot of the original stuff was in the theater world. And I wanted to create a concert series that was all original singer-songwriter music So I started a concert series at Woodwalk. Well, it started at the Town Hall Bakery till we got too big, and then it moved over to Woodwalk. And we kept that running for 15 years and had quite a community of people that would come out and hear people they've never heard of. They just trusted me. And that was another part of community, was they got to know me, and then they trusted who I would bring in for them to hear. And it was an amazing thing to experience an audience coming together over somebody they never heard of before, and then hear them talking afterwards and, hugging each other. And so that's kind of the community that I'm seeing.
So, a follow-up question. What comes first, the words or the melody or the music for you?
It's different every time. I would say most of the time, it's the words. I kind of started out as a poet as a kid, and although I did write songs when I was a kid, but I'll get a little run of words in my head when I'm driving. I always have to keep a pen and paper next to me when I'm driving. Doesn't that happen to everybody? Or my phone, I have to turn it on and record into it. So I'll get some words, and then, or sometimes I get a little melody that I start humming, and I hum it into my phone and record it, and then when I get some words flopping around in my brain, I kind of think, I wonder if this would go with that melody. Or sometimes I'll write a whole complete song of lyrics and not have any music to it. And then I have to go about crafting music that fits the words. But then what usually happens is you have to change the words to fit the music you're working with. Because in songwriting, unless you're Bob Dylan or Dave Carter, you usually tend to use a little bit less verbiage than someone who's writing a story, because you're hanging your words on notes, and some of those notes can be held a long time. So you don't have to fill all the space up with lots of words, and you also have spaces where there's no words at all. So I tend to have to weed out of a sentence that has 12 words in it. I'm going to probably pare it down to 6 or 7, so that I can say what I need to say as simply as possible in a way that can reach people, but also be conveyed on the music, with the music. So sometimes I dream music or words, and that's why I keep paper next to my bed. I think that happens to all of us.
We'll get to your second question, but are you ever surprised by the impact of your music, of the words, on an audience, on a song that perhaps you didn't think was all that wonderful, or certainly not your favorite, and then suddenly it just has this immediate impact on the audience in a way you didn't anticipate? Does that happen?
It does happen, and because I may think a song is really fantastic, but it doesn't reach somebody, doesn't reach people because it was too personal. So if I write a song that is personal but also is available to people, that they can take it into their own hearts and link up their own circumstances with the song that I wrote about an experience I had, you do see people's lives changing in front of your eyes when they take it into their soul. And it's very much like when I was a nurse. I feel like when I sit in front of an audience, I look out there, and after all these years, I know many of the people that come to the shows, and I can tell that person needs to hear this song tonight, or that person needs to hear this song. You can tell by the looks on their faces. And so, it blows me away when people know all the words to my songs that I've forgotten the words to, and so they correct me. And it feels really good and very sobering. It feels like a responsibility,
Well, you've probably already partially answered your second question, but how do you write for a listening audience as opposed to just for yourself?
Well, I don't swear in my songs that I sing for other people, and there's a lot of anger in me these days, and I'm just not the kind of person that's gonna throw out a bunch of angry, hateful, frustrated, mad stuff at you. I just want to condense that all down into a message that is thoughtful and that makes you think for yourself. But there's so many things in the world to be worried about, as those high school kids know. It keeps me up at night. I worry about my children and my grandchildren and what kind of world are they going to live in, and how it seems like humanity always waits till we're past the tipping point to start fixing things. And that happens in our everyday lives. And I wonder, if we can't get it right in our everyday lives, how can the whole world get it together, you know? So I can't even remember what you asked me, except
You are answering it.
I do edit my brain to present a song that is not going to offend people. And I had a long talk about this with a musician one night that came to perform in one of my house concerts, and I said, I'm just so mad. And she goes, well, sing it. I said, I just can't do that to people. I have to logically present it, or poetically present it in a way, you know, like Mary Oliver. Oh my gosh, with so much beauty, she makes you go, oh my God. So that's what I'm trying to do.
Really see things at a different level of awareness. That's what she does.
Yeah.
When I read a sentence of hers, I'm just blown away by the simplicity of it.
Yeah.
Of course, I knew that.
Yeah.
Why couldn't I write that? Thank you, Jeannie.
Thank you.
Erika. So these are more, I would say that they're more geared toward your work, which is fascinating because of your profession. But what inspired you to write your book, Brave Love 365? And I'm going to pair that with the next statement because I think it gives a bit of a summary as to what the book is about. But narcissistic abuse is a loaded, challenging topic. What was your self-care practice while delving deeply into that topic? So first, why this book? And then it kind of sounds like you did what Jeannie doesn't want to do. You poured everything into it. So talk about that a little bit.
Okay, well, the full title of my book is Brave Love 365, Daily Inspiration, Validation, and Support for Survivors of Narcissistic Abuse and Toxic Relationships. So where Jeannie talks about the beautiful, warm, fuzzy things about life and the warmth, I kind of talk about the other side of things. And this kind of goes to the whole conversation of, are we listening? Because for survivors of this type of abuse, it's such a hidden form of abuse. They don't know how to talk about it, and many of us don't know how to listen because we don't know what it is. So a number of years ago, I was a counselor, and I found myself in an impossible relationship. I finally went to a friend who was a counselor, and I said, I don't know what's going on, but this isn't working. You know, but I couldn't put it into words. She sat and listened to me for an hour, and she said, you're with a narcissist. And I went, oh, they don't even teach you in school. I have my master's in counseling. They didn't teach me what a narcissist was. They didn't go into depth about this type of abuse. So I went home from that session, and I started listening to other survivor stories and other professionals' thoughts and facts about it on YouTube. And I felt set free. I didn't know there was words for what I was going through. When a person is in a relationship like that, they think they're crazy. They think it's all their fault. And they can't put words to it because it's so subtle. It's so insidious. So I remember standing in my bathroom, looking in the mirror, going, I'm going to write a book. When I get myself back together, you know, I'm going to write a book so that other people know they're not alone, they're not crazy, and they know what they just went through. So yes, narcissistic abuse is not a light, and toxic relationships are not a light subject at all. And I actually took a sabbatical from my counseling practice to do this. So that kept me motivated because that was my job for 9 months. And each day, so it's a daily book, so there's one entry per day. And each day, well, okay, I missed this part. after I decided to write this book, all of these ideas just came spilling out of my head. Oh, I should put this in words. Oh, people need to know this. So the day after I closed my counseling practice to take this sabbatical, I sat down and I outlined the entire book in like 30 minutes. Like the subjects just came pouring out of me. Now, writing the book, unfortunately, was not quite that easy. There were days where I could get 2 to 3 entries written. There were days where I think I got through 1 some days. And the way I wrote these was to bring myself back into that pain. And that's where like I dove back in. And I guess I kind of did what you did, Jeannie. I felt it, but then I had to translate it so that people could feel that I knew where they were when they read my words, but do it without triggering them. So I've got all kinds of topics in there. You know, the beginning of the book starts with definitions and, hey, this is what you've just been through. This is what you need to do right now in terms of getting support and, you know, the definitions to tell them what they went through. The middle of the book starts asking them questions, really getting them to look deep within themselves to see who they really are, what they really want in their lives, how they, you know, what happened to make them susceptible. Most people who get in situations like this have had trauma, you know, their whole lives. Not everybody, but most people. So it was really intense some days, and that leads to the self-care question. For the first part of it, I didn't do such a good job with self-care. I just sat and I wrote and I wrote and I wrote and I wrote, and that was not sustainable. So I realized I had to, you know, I was almost fighting with my manuscript at points in time. So the first thing I did for self-care was I would take a break about every few hours, and I would put on music and I would dance in my living room. It just got everything out of me. I have a beautiful black cat that I just adore. She was also a huge self-care mechanism for me to just sit and, you know, sometimes I let the tears pour out of me. Sometimes I, you know, talked really loud or went and sang in my car or, you know, things like that. But as I was doing it, it emptied me out. And now I can work with people and be present with them without being triggered. And I've even worked with narcissists who have wanted to, you know, make some changes. Now that isn't something that, you know, happens often and isn't a very successful endeavor most of the time, but I've kind of seen both sides of things. So,
Had you written before this?
No, well, actually, that's not true. I wanted to write a romance novel, like, let's see, 30 some years ago. And I had almost the whole thing written, and I abandoned it. While I was in the narcissistic relationship, I picked that back up. And I just started to write it, but I couldn't get very far because I didn't, you know, you don't have energy for creative things. So after I got out of that relationship and we hit COVID and we hit quarantine, I sat down and I started writing and writing and writing. So I wrote the first draft of a novel to bring awareness of this particular issue, but in a way that's more mainstream, that anybody would want to read. You know, parts of it are like a romance novel, there's beach scenes, there's the scenes in a therapist office to really give an inner perspective of what it's like to go through the process. It follows a woman who starts in a crazy relationship and she gets herself out of it and heals. So it's really fun. I'm in the editing phases of that one right now. So
then that answers my next question, which was going to be, was that your only book?
Okay, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, it's not.
Not my only book, no.
So that opened something else up inside you about communication, it sounds like.
Right.
Not just the catharsis of getting the damage out, but also a method of communication that maybe you hadn't accessed before.
Exactly. And there's more coming. I'm in the process of writing a virtual course for survivors. I'm trying to kind of bottle what I do in session with people, which, you know, you can't really do that, but hopefully it'll help them work through things with their own therapist or on their own. So, yeah.
So What motivates you to keep going on bringing completion to a book, which is probably the question that everybody would want to answer here?
Well, it's interesting because the first book, what motivated me was I needed to get back to my counseling practice and make money. So that kept me going.
Writing, you don't make money in writing?
Well, not when you're just writing, and then you're lucky if you make some after it's published. But with this novel, my whole process is very interesting because, and I think maybe a lot of people are like this, especially in my field, but I don't know that we talk about it much. I went through a lot of trauma growing up, and obviously relational trauma as well. So through this experience with this relationship, I've come to know myself and become okay with myself. And I know how to take care of myself, and I know how to set boundaries. So I have to, there's days I can't write. I'm not creative when my brain is in survival mode and I'm thinking I'm back in, whatever situation my body is remembering in that moment. So I had to take a chunk of time off last spring and just really let it go for a bit. Now I've come through a lot of that, and I'm in a good place, and I might miss a day right now if there's just something that's triggered in me that I need to work through. And part of that can be from forward movement. You start moving forward, you have to let go, or all the things that are inside of us that we're holding on to come to the surface so we can let it go and continue moving. So yeah, it's I guess in a way too, what keeps me going, I want to leave a legacy for my children. I want to blaze a trail for them to know that they can blaze their own trails. So.
Thank you, Erika. Dan.
Yes, ma'am.
What do you write for, and how important is the reader in your process? Which is a really great question.
Well, we all write for the money.
I didn't come up with that question. That's Dan's question.
What do I write for? My journey is a little bit different in this, but I write for myself so far, and always have. And I'm lucky enough that, and old enough that I didn't go into this thinking I was going to produce work that was going to make a lot of money, and decided to self-publish simply because in my 70s I wasn't going to try to find an agent and send stuff out, etc. It also was very free, in the sense of audience and who's going to read. A writer's always got to have that somewhere in their mind. And I mean, that's always the number one question people ask. Not number one, but if you're trying to publish, who's your audience? That's the first question any publisher wants to know. Do you know who you're writing for? Because it's so easy to go in a zillion directions that it's a mishmash. In my case, I grew up in a loving family, but they were not storytellers. It wasn't until I was much older, that I found out my dad was, well, I knew he was one of 10 kids. And I knew his mother, she was the only grandmother I knew. And I found out that his father had abandoned the family back in the 20s or so with 10 kids. And all of a sudden it made sense because nobody had ever heard this guy's name. He was never mentioned. If he came up with my grandmother, and I was never there when it did, but if a cousin was brazen enough to bring it up, she'd get angry. I ended up doing the family genealogy in the 90s, and I ended up with a lot of material. Starting with 3 or 4 names, I ended up with probably 30 or 40 names out of graves, etc., that nobody knew who these people were, relationships. So I had done a lot of genealogy, had that information, and was thinking I was just going to write this up as a family tree type thing, and started to do that and connected with history, because kind of like that. And then several years into it, I decided, well, hell, I've got all this information, there's no stories, I'm going to make up my own. And that book I wrote basically for myself because it made me go through pieces and try to, why would my grandfather have left the family? Did indeed my grandmother kick him out? She had children after he left by him. They all look alike. And so there were a ton of just human questions, family questions there that there were no answers to. So as I started to piece that together, I was doing it for myself, and just as Erika just said, I really thought of it once it was starting to come together as a legacy. I've got two brothers. They both had two kids. They've got grandkids. I never had children. So it felt like a way for me to produce something that had a lot of background information that the cousins, etc., would know, even though the names were changed to protect the innocent. And it became that, a legacy. So it was written for myself. But, and I hope this doesn't fall into narcissism, I've got an ego. And I wasn't going to, I would write for myself, but I wanted to put this thing out in the world and, take a shot with that. And I didn't want to do that if it was crap. And it's very easy to fool yourself, or on the other end, not have the confidence of, is this any good? So partway, I had the idea I was going to go in this direction. And there's this paper up here, the Pulse, I think it's called, and they have this thing called the Hal Prize.
Excellent newspaper.
And this was back about 2017, and I sent in they're short pieces, 2,000 to 3,000 words, of a father and son in interchange. It was just based on a vague memory of being in my backyard. My dad used to come out and would help with the fix the bike, and that's what became the first scene. And that was totally for me. It was this memory. I mean, I could picture the cigarette hanging out of my dad's mouth and the smoke in his eyes and fixing things and talking to me, etc. And that's kind of what then kicked off into the book and went from there. So the short answer to your question is, I wrote it for myself, but because I wanted it to be good, I spent a lot of time on the craftsmanship to have pride in it. And when I sent in the Hal piece back in 2017, it got a second place. And an author who didn't know me from a load of wood, I never met the person, etc., the brief statement that he had written nailed exactly the types of things I was trying to put into it. And that gave me a lot of confidence to go ahead and actually end up turning it into a novel and bringing it out. But again, I want to stress, if you are writing, unless it's a diary and you want other people to read it, you do have to be thinking of audience. And I kind of looking at it, it's almost like a flipping coin of sometimes you're thinking of just totally yourself and what do I want to write, what am I trying to convey? And then there's other times, especially when you start to read some of it back to yourself, saying, who's going to read this? This isn't going to make any sense. I haven't captured it. I've just kind of, as you were saying, writing, and it went nowhere. It was cathartic, but throw all that garbage away and start thinking, who's going to read this? And if I wasn't writing a young adult novel, so I knew my audience was going to be older than young adults.
So we're missing a part there. So we're going to go backtrack a little bit. You started writing for yourself to satisfy a creative urge and to finish your family story, and then it turned into a legacy, some use in the outside world, outside of just your own desire to find out what happened with your family through your imagination. Then you go from there to actually wanting to hear what the audience has to say. Why is it important what the audience has to say? Because then you learned after that it's very important to consider who your audience is. So why is the audience important?
I'm going to say, for me, it's ego. If somebody reads something and I'm trying to capture something, and I do, and they get that, I take both pride in that, and it feels good. It feels like I've been heard, and it feels even more important because they're going to read it one time. In writing something, you read this 300 some pages about 300 times. And if I've nailed what I want, and the only way I can find that out is to get that feedback. I taught writing, not as creative, but in the actually K-12 situations, and work with teachers on the teaching of writing. And one of the things we frequently bring up, again, would be the audience of thinking who you're writing for. But it's the feedback, and that goes into the communication, the loop, the conversation. And it also allows me, and I'll be honest with this, there are, depending on who's giving the feedback, I'm going to take that at different levels of, what do I say? I'll just take it, in one sense, it's good to get that feedback, and a lot of times people will say something, and I'll take that and go back and, I would want to change it, because we'll have beta readers of writing, etc. And other times they'll say it, and that's not what I was trying to do, and they missed the point. But that again helps me with the communication, and did I get out what I wanted to get out and put it to the Erika?
What things are most important to you as a writer of fiction?
One word is, I guess the noun would be evocation, but to evoke. Can I take a situation, a feeling, an incident, and this goes to the audience again, can I evoke in them the emotion and the reaction, whatever their reaction, because that's going to be their piece, but can I touch an emotion in them so that it sparks something and they react? I'm getting a kick out of right now. I'm just finished a second novel and have some people reading it, and one of my readers has been an older gentleman, and one of them is a novelist, a new novelist in her 30s, early 30s. And this is set in a fictional school district, having been a teacher all my life. And the different reactions I get from the two is just amazing. And they're very, very different. It's, how dare this character do this or say that or think this? And the older person is, oh yeah, that's the way we all fought, back in the day. So again, that's a feedback, but it's that putting something down that stops a person, and whether it angers them or they just like the way I put it together, and it creates a reaction on their part. Because if I write something and they read it, and like a mother does, when I would take piano lessons, I'd come up from the basement and she said, "Oh, that sounded very nice." And I, oh, yeah, right. And because you knew it was crap. And but when you get a solid reaction and that feels good. There's that connection, and that's what I try to accomplish.
Is that during the writing process or with the finished product? Are you talking about workshopping the novel or showing it to people before it's actually finished and receiving feedback to continue? Is that what you mean by that?
Right. I've got a few people that, as I'm writing, doing it. The reality of my world is, the bookstores sell these, and if I'm out at a farmer's market or just do Mayfest, you don't get any feedback. However, now having had it out for a while, I'll get people stuff. Oh yeah, I bought that last year. I liked it. That's nice to hear. But when somebody, and I think Anne brought this up, or Jeanne, somebody comes up and says something about, "I really like the way you did this. This really touched me," or "This had this effect on me." That's important. So I can get feedback while I was writing it, and got lots of friends to shop them with. Once they're out in the world, you don't know.
The reason I asked is because I'm curious if it actually impacts the direction that you take with your work of fiction.
It affects the nuances. So I'll use that example again of the young novelist getting feedback. her world, and particularly things like race relationships and language of that, is a very different mindset of what I grew up with in the 50s. And in a particular character, and part of the theme of the second book is the perspective of the way, I'll say myself, but there are lots of people like me, weren't racist, but we didn't live in a world. I didn't live in a world. I lived in an all-white northwest side of Chicago neighborhood, and I never heard an expletive towards blacks or any place else. But there is all this underlying what you're seeing on TV and the way we think. And a big part of my thinking was always, that's really crappy the way we white people, what we've done to blacks. But also, I came to realize as I got older, part of my thinking was, but it'd be so much easier for them if they would just do this to fit in. Now, somebody younger looks at that as, that's obviously racist. It's an implicit bias, which if you deny you have implicit biases, you're lying to yourself. They are there, and there's a ton of them. But that's the kind of thing I try to capture in here, is characters dealing with some of those issues. And so getting feedback from other writers commenting on that, I may tweak something, but I'm not changing the trajectory or the conflict or how it'll resolve.
Thank you, Dan. Alessandra.
Hi.
How are you?
Good.
What challenges do you face as a writer?
Well, I have thought about this question, and I sometimes consider whether or not I am a writer. I write for a living. I write and edit for different clients, and my creative work has taken a back seat right now. So even though I have written many poems and I occasionally write for the local other newspaper, Washington Island Observer, which they're very generous. They let me write a nature column, and it allows me to do a lot of my poetic thinking, which I am grateful for. I don't do a lot of writing right now, but I am a mother of 2 young kids. I work like 3 jobs, and I have no childcare. And so there's just a lot of obstacles to writing, because writing takes time, and it takes quiet, and it takes moments that I don't seem to get a lot of right now. But as I reflect on whether or not I am a writer, I think I am a writer because I am always turning words in my head, and even if it's for Forbes.com and not for poetry, it's still, I'm trying to get the best phrase in the fewest words to communicate something, and that challenge of putting language to an experience is just joyful and hard. And I think as a poet, one of the things poets are often trying to do is to write the ineffable, to be able to put to words the thing that you just can't describe. So every spring I see these birch trees, and they are just this brilliant, it's not quite lime green, it's just this soft green, the leaves are just coming out, and I pass it by every day on the island when I'm driving home, and every spring I'm trying to write a poem for these trees. And so that is also a challenge of just, the world is so exquisite, the world is so terrible, and I'm trying to put that into a poem that somebody can read and have a response to, and that is just the ultimate challenge. So every poem is just trying to get one step closer to describing those birch trees or whatever is there.
Your statement about whether or not you are a writer, is that because nonfiction is not a writer's realm, or only the creative and only fiction?
I think I went to school for poetry. I have an MFA and a PhD in creative writing, which, as we've all addressed, it doesn't make you money. But I love that about poetry, that it's outside of economics. Like, you can dream of being a novelist who makes money, but you just cannot dream of being a poet who makes money. So I love that about it. So I have just started to recognize in myself that I have set poetry as like, oh, that's when I'm writing. Like, people ask me, are you writing? And I'm like, no, I don't write any poetry right now. But I actually write a lot for my work. I do lots of different kinds of writing, and I have just been realizing that, I don't know why it's taken me this long, that all the work I have put into being a poet is serving me as a writer, as in all these other roles where I'm writing less poetically. So, yeah, so I think it was a definition I had limited of what it meant for me to be a writer was to be a poet, but I am a writer, yes.
Yay. Did you just come out today for the first time? Excellent. I definitely know what you're talking about when you say it was a journey to recognizing what kind of a writer you are. Because my journey was very similar to yours. I have an MFA in creative writing, and I was just going to be a fiction writer. And while I was in graduate school, I got a job at a newspaper. And I was hooked on writing about real people and not about imaginative people. And about that time, I moved to Dora County, and many of you probably remember Nora Bly, the late, great Nora Bly. He was a mentor of mine, and he read a lot of my creative work, and I was working for the Dora County Advocate at that time as a reporter. And he put together an anthology, and he wanted to see my novel, one of my novels that was in a drawer. And so I showed it to him, and he published a chapter of it in an anthology. And then he told me, you are a natural-born novelist. You must quit your job and just write full-time. So I, still not at the end of that journey where I'm trying to figure out exactly what kind of a writer I am, quit my job and moved to an Arizona town that kind of approximates the Arizona town that was the basis of my novel. And then I proceeded to sit in a room and write. Pretty soon I was playing Royal Match, Angry Birds, and then I saw that somebody needed a part-time newspaper reporter, and I jumped on it. And I realized that I needed that part, real people, to actually engage with and tell their stories. And so then I packed up and I moved back to the Midwest and took an editor position at another newspaper before I returned here. So it is a journey. And if we had talked before this, I could have probably given you that experience. Anyway, I'm talking about myself, and I'm supposed to be asking you questions. How are you overcoming those issues that you talked about?
I'm trying to start a daycare on the island. I am trying also to participate in more things like this where I am forced to reflect and think about my writer's life, and I do write sometimes at 4 a.m. in bed on my phone, which is not the best way to write poetry, but I think just little by little and being patient, and also I am involved I help run a farm or two, and seeing the natural world and the seasons, and there are different seasons for all sorts of things. And I think as a writer, as a poet, I am in a listening stage where I'm taking in a lot of information. I'm seeing my children see the world. I'm seeing trees growing. I'm seeing vegetables and flowers doing what they do. And just seeing the seasons of it also gives me hope that, like, this is my season for other things right now, and there will be a season for more time for writing poetry, and that gives me hope.
Thank you, Alessandra. So that concludes this portion. And now comes the part that we're here for, which is the listening. So I have over here, so there is a metaphor with this, it is a ball of yarn, and we are here talking about stories. So the point of communicating and talking is to be able to have listeners, right? If we just talk to ourselves, what does that accomplish? If we just write for ourselves, what does that accomplish? So we really do need that audience. We need listeners. We need readers. We need people to hear so that they can connect and relate with us. But listening is one of those things that none of us ever are taught how to do. We all know this. We're adults. We've been at this a long time. We have all figured out how to listen better than maybe we did when we were in our teens or 20s or 30s. But we still find ourselves thinking other thoughts while somebody is talking, thinking about what we're going to make for dinner, thinking about what we're going to ask next, judging, that's a big one, judging what the person is saying. Oh, I really like that, or ooh, where is that person coming from? So we do a lot of that. That's not listening. That's not just accepting what the person is giving us, what we're hearing, what we're reading. So now we get to show what kind of listeners we are. We're going to ask the panel questions, and I'm going to bring you the ball of yarn, and then I will carry the ball of yarn to Anne. She will be the first person that somebody here will be asking a question of. And then I will bring the ball of yarn back to the next person who will be asking the question. And at the end of this, there's really no value to this ball of yarn, except for that we will have a visual of our conversation here. And you can't get up and go to the bathroom. So you'll be holding on to this matrix, and you will need to keep this matrix going. All right, so first, who has a question for Anne? And somebody will have a question here. And if you don't volunteer, I'm going to pick on you. Yes. Well, I should say, Rebecca, you cannot. No, I'm kidding. Rebecca, you start for sure. Hold on to that. And you can sit. I'm going to carry it over to Anne with a microphone in my hands. There you go. It's a little tricky with the microphone.
So are you ready for me to ask?
I am ready.
So the question I'm very curious about, I love to read, and I often see that writers always ask for feedback and other writers to read their work. Do you think that that's an important part of being a writer, to get that feedback before your work is published, to have critiquing, and why do you think it's important?
Absolutely, it's important. We miss things. Especially in my case, I wrote a historical fiction, and I'll just give you one quick example. I have a ship captain who sails up and down the coast of Door County in 1871, and I had a reader, a friend in my book club, who is a sailor, and she said, "Anne, your ship language is all wrong," because I've not sailed. And so she gave me a picture, like a book that was full of ships and terminology, and she was right. I needed to fix that because that would have been offsetting for somebody that was reading my book. It would have detracted them from maybe the enjoyment of my book if they kept saying, "Gino, that language was wrong." So it's really helpful to have readers.
Thank you. That's really great perspective to hear.
So you hang on to this.
Okay. Oh, yes.
And then I'm going to bring it to the next person who's going to ask a question. It doesn't have to be in a row. We just started off with Anne. Yay! Thank you. You don't have any tag on. Hi, Nikki. Nikki? Hi, Nikki. Hi. Let's all say hi, Nikki. Hi, Nikki. Sorry, I'm making my way slowly over here. I should have not hauled it into a polish. Oh, okay. I was just going to take the microphone. Absolutely.
So I read Anne's book. I loved it. I felt like I was really there. So I guess it's not exactly a question, but I'm curious, how did you do your research about ships on Lake Michigan? And especially, I was very interested in all the goings on in the Milwaukee Harbor and how the different captains would have to make deals for shipping the lumber or whatever. I mean, it felt real, but I'm very curious what your research was on that.
It was fun to do research. The joy of writing historical fiction is I get to do research. The flip side of that is that it was easy to get bogged down in that and lose sight of my story and get sidetracked. But, librarians are wonderful. More than once I got stuck with a question and went to the reference librarians, or Google was a wonderful tool. So yes, I read, I asked, I tried to get it right, and so I kept going until I felt like I had enough basis to hopefully make it accurate. So, thank you.
I'm so sorry. We're trying to figure out the yarn thing when you're talking. That's very rude. All right. Who's next?
Hello, I'm Eden. Eden. Hi. This isn't for anyone in particular. Actually, I'm sorry. Jeannie, how do you, you kind of said it, that you just come up with things, but how do you come up with what brings you to an idea for a lyric, a story, a song? Is it something that happens? Is it some longing from long ago? How do you come up with your ideas?
That's a good question. Sometimes I sit there and I go, I don't know what to write about, and I try to make up things to write about, and that actually never goes very well. I kind of have to find an emotional tether to something. So, but sometimes it's just observing the world. One of my favorite songs I wrote because I was driving to Algoma, and there was this big field of clover, and they looked like people, little people's heads. So I wrote a song about people, standing out under the sun and the stars and connecting underground by their roots. And And that's a really fun kind of song to write because I'm taking something that I just saw and I'm metaphorizing it and connecting it to a different world in a way. And then sometimes, right now I'm kind of in a nostalgic reflective phase. And I had gone through a lot of photographs of my younger years, and I started seeing patterns of connections with people in my childhood that helped me become who I am. So I've been writing songs about various incidents, or groups of people or things like that. But trying not to just say it like, this lady taught me this and this lady taught me that. I'm trying to tell the story of that person and then infer that I learned something through it. So, and sometimes it's just a phrase that I hear somewhere and it kicks me into a place. One day I was driving along and I just, in my head, heard halfway to heaven, halfway to hell. And that became a song, an angry song. One of the few times I wrote an angry song about an ex-boyfriend. And so there's really, just like any writer, it comes from everywhere, a casual phrase that someone throws at you, the way someone treated you at the grocery store, a news article, everything. The green birch trees. I know that wonderful green.
Hi, I'm Melissa, and this is for Jeannie. If you had gotten negative feedback on the song, would you still release it anyway? Because you feel just that one or two people that don't like it, you feel like, oh, there'll be more people that will like it anyway, so I might just release it.
That's a really good question, and I have lots of experience with that. For me, it depends on who's doing the criticizing. If it's a fellow musician who is criticizing my musicianship, I'm real insecure about that. And I might take the song back to the drawing board and work on the distracting properties of a ball of yarn as it rolls across the floor.
The ball of yarn is not working.
There's a song in there somewhere.
I will just have to give it.
Am I supposed to hold this again? Oh,
Yes, you are.
I'm going to start knitting. I don't knit, though. I crochet. Yeah, so if it's a person who comes up to me and says, you should do your entire CD over only as country music, which happened. And I just kind of stand there and go, oh, ow, 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 ow. But actually, they were onto something because I sing differently when I sing country music. My voice takes on a different timbre, and that's what they were trying to tell me, is that served me better to sing that kind of stuff. I sing differently when I sing my own songs. So, I guess you do have to have a thick skin. Any of us who are creating have to make that decision. Am I married to this idea, to this creation that I've made, or am I going to change it depending on what other people say? And most of the time, no, I don't change it. But I might rethink it if they get the totally wrong. If the message is not getting across at all, I might just throw the song away and never sing it again. But the songs that I tend to record are songs that I've been singing for a while, like probably a year in concert, and I can tell that they're connecting with people. So, thank you for asking that.
Yes. You have to be way over here.
Come here and then we'll just like do really.
Oh no.
Now I am yearning. I want to get you some jacks so you can throw
I have to wait for the
No, I think I'm stuck. Yes.
Okay.
You're supposed to throw them all around.
Okay.
I think it's kind of dangerous.
Yeah, there we go. And then we're gonna throw it over to Dan.
Yes. But
There
now
we go.
it's
Let's do that. Hi, Dan. Through your questions and you're talking of your book and you're saying it was a lot for you and it's a very individual one-on-one thing, but you also started the DPAC, the Door County Published Authors Collective. And that is a very profound association of people and writers that you lead along with many other people. Can you just kind of share what that is and how that works in community with the multiple members that are in that and what that does and affects the community that started from your writing and your book?
Sure. That came out of, as I was finishing novel and trying to decide how do I get this out, and I knew there were what were called vanity press publishers and a variety of them. So it came out of ignorance. And I was searching around for who I might go with, so I called up Jared. And I didn't know him at the time, but I knew some of the people that were there from the beginning, Dee, Paul Simmons, and I know Right On was there for a while, and just asked him, because I knew there was a poetry collective, and there wasn't one for published authors, and we talked a little bit and both jumped on the idea of, well, let's try that. And it was right about then that COVID hit, if I remember, and so he put out, because he had the contacts, put out to anybody interested, and we started with, I don't know, about 10 people, and started on Zoom, and of course the beginning is, oh, this is nice, what are we gonna do? What do we wanna be when we grow up? And we still haven't figured it out. If that was 2020, and this is 2024, we're now in our 4th year. And it keeps evolving because more people get in and people step forward and want to do different things. So Jared's came up with the idea right off the bat of a author's book fair. And of course, you've got books, you want a book fair to sell them in. And he put that together. And then out of that came a variety of other things. Some of the groups started to do farmers markets together. The Chris Kindle Mart, where we put our own bookstore together. And that has just led to more and more starting to share information. We're just in the early stages of this because, as you can tell from up here, lots of people have lots of ideas, and it's evolving. And that is part of the community. And it's not easy for me. I'm not a public person. I can never remember if it was Groucho Marx or W.C. Fields who said he refused to be a part of any group that would let him be a member. And it's kind of always been part of just who I am. It's the way it is. But the group has helped me a lot in meeting people, getting out, and I think people are making some new friends. And more we're starting to help each other and as beta readers, etc. So that's where it's coming from, and I still thank Jared and Al now and Right On for taking that on.
Okay. You look like you could catch this.
No.
We're not sitting in a good place for me.
This is for Melissa. We kind of touched on the pandemic, but how did the pandemic affect your writing practice?
For me?
Yes.
Okay, Melissa is my sister. Everybody gets us mixed up. It's okay.
Are you twins?
Just about.
Twins born about 20 years apart.
That's a good question. During the pandemic, after the initial shock of the whole COVID thing, I absolutely adored being quarantined because I'm a total introvert, and it just was really nice for me. But that is when I sat down and started writing. And, you know, as a trauma survivor, sometimes you get hit by triggers and it, you know, just affects you. And takes your focus away from what you might want to do otherwise. So I didn't have a lot of triggers because I was in my house doing what I wanted to do, you know. So it was real easy for me to dive into it and just start writing the ideas that have been in my head for years. So, yeah.
Can't tell shadow from yarn. Your cat would have a great time.
Yes, right. My cat would be all over this.
My name is Marie, and my question is for Erika. So you said you have a background of counseling, both as a counselor and going to counseling yourself, and you basically did like a workbook for narcissism, being a survivor of narcissism. Okay, so I understood you right. So my question is, if a person, like say myself, I'm trying to do a workbook, but for people that are disabled and have gone through different levels of trauma and different levels of having triggers and stuff like that, one thing I've run into is a lot of what I can write about is personal experience, which is what you did. I'm just wondering, like, from your background, what helped you for if you needed research or needed to know more of something that wasn't necessarily on a personal level, so that actually can speak to somebody, like if you have an experience of that.
Okay, wow, that sounds like a really powerful and needed book. I hope you continue with that, because that would be an amazing tool for people. And that's the key, is that, you know, it's people who have gone through the experiences that bring the great tools. You know, we need to write the books. People need our stories. So in terms of, there's a mixture of my personal experiences in this book and clients' experiences, which I have anonymized all of it because I'm not going to, you know, there's no value in calling anybody out or anything. But so I don't know if, you know, at one point in my work, I started interviewing other survivors. And I asked them very specific questions that related to what I wanted to write about, you know, what their experiences were, you know, different topics and how that affected them. So I don't know if you could talk with other disabled people. I think looking at, you know, see if you could interview maybe some professionals. I think there's professionals that would be happy to talk with you and help you create a tool like that. Because again, I just think that's such a great idea. Because you know, if you are writing about something, you know it inside and out. And that's a gift to the people that need to hear it.
So here we have in the matrix a gap over this side of the room. There are no strings going over there except for the first one. You know where I'm going.
No pressure.
I have a question.
Oh, yay! Ron, thank you.
This is for Jeanne. So I've become enamored with Jeannie's wonderful singing voice first, then her lyrics and her songs, and Jeannie always seems to be such a gentle soul to me. So Jeannie, I'm wondering, when are you going to have a concert to let all that anger out, that we can hear some of that? I'd like to hear that.
There was a time where I was when I was part of Steelbridge Songfest, and I would go there and I would try to write as differently as I possibly could. So I tried to write a really hard rock and roll song, which, you know, involved a lot of belting out and screaming. And I wrote this song, and when I got, you know, with some other people, and when I got done, Pat McDonald said, "That was something." He said, I don't know what it was, but that was something. And I guess, I tend to sing other people's songs because they do, like Bob Dylan has a lot of really edgy, hitting your nerve kind of songs, maybe a little subtle sometimes, but I find that if I sing, I'll do a Mad concert sometime, but you'll have to come. You'll probably be the only person there, because people get really freaked out when I get mad.
All right, and bill it as your angry concert. We'll all be there.
Actually, if you come to any Earth Day concert I do, I'm really pissed off at those concerts, and I sing and they actually told me this year, don't sing your hard songs. Don't sing the songs that make people feel bad. So I know that those songs are my angry songs.
So this question pretty much goes to everybody, but I'll address it to Alessandra because we're both poets. I went through a period when I lost confidence because of rejection. And as Deb had, said about Nora Blind, Nora was the person who affirmed that I was a poet. But how do you deal? As a poet, we're always sending out stuff, and we're always getting rejections. And how do you maintain that confidence to keep going? How do you keep going?
Well, good question. I have been an editor of a literary magazine, so when I get a rejection, I remember the process of rejecting other people. So I know that it's not personal. There's just a lot of factors that go into it. And I think also I have been in a lot of workshops, and I think that also helps you grow that thick skin that you need. And I just remember, I don't know, I like my poems, I like reading other people's poems, so just keeping reading, and if I enjoy it, then I hope somebody else will. And, when I write for the Washington Island Observer and somebody gives me feedback, that helps me know to keep going. And so just those little comments, and there's just so many people submitting so many poems that it's not a big deal if you get rejected. You just can't you can't let it get to you. Yeah, I think.
Well, you kind of said what I was hoping. You said you like your own work. So there's a level of confidence.
Yeah, I guess so. And there's also periods where I don't send out very often because I find sending out poetry very unpoetic. It's very monotonous and terrible. So you have to be in the headspace to send out. And when I get a rejection, I'm actually kind of excited because it means I sent my work to somebody and somebody read it. So it's still a connection. And you can also read between the lines. There's often different levels of rejection. So you're like, oh, I think I got the B level. It's not the meanest rejection.
Can somebody give us some feedback to one of the panelists on something that they said that resonated with them? So it's not necessarily a question, it's more of a challenge of listening. Wait.
This was for Erika. I have been in a tough relationship myself with someone that I seem to not really get rid of, but I have the heart to not give up on people, and I'm a very, 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 very forgiving person, and sometimes that gets me in trouble, or I think it does. What would you, it's not really a question, but just your background and everything, and the book you have out for that one specifically, I think is very relatable to me. So thank you for writing that as well.
Somebody else. I can also start writing. I actually know how to do it, actually. This is for Erika. I will let,
It's for Erika. Careful there, Jeanne.
I can talk really loud.
It was very affirming that you knew something was wrong. You knew you were in a relationship and you couldn't pinpoint it. And regardless of, maybe it was brought up in counseling, in class, at some point, experiencing it is very different from being able to be on the outside and say, this is what's going on. So the fact that you went to somebody who was able to pinpoint that right away, it's like, oh, you're in a narcissistic relationship. Because I had a similar situation where I went to somebody and said, this is what's going on, I can't figure it out. And they said it, and I was like, yes, that's exactly it. So thank you for affirming that when you have questions like that, they're in your head. You know what it is, but you have to get out of your head to be able to see exactly what it is. So it's always helpful to have somebody to listen to you. Thanks for sharing. Here.
You're welcome. I'm breaking all the rules of conversation.
Thanks, Cheryl. Dan, you triggered a set of thoughts given your sending out your novel to be read by others, and that is really the value of a good editor, a good partner, with somebody who's going to be on the writing journey with you. I read a book last year, kind of a biography of a guy named Robert Gottlieb, who was a wonderful, wonderful editor in New York for many years and edited so many books. It wasn't editing in the sense of it was, but the copy editing kind of are the T's dotted, T's crossed and I's dotted, but it's a story being well told, and kind of the dialogue was creative between Gottlieb and others. And what I'm wondering is are you finding the feedback you're getting to be creative in the sense of it's really stimulating more thinking and causing you to think better thoughts about the story that you're telling?
I would like to say yes, but not particularly. The amount of time that an editor who's going to really get involved in the story with you would take would either require spending a whole lot of money to hire that person, or having somebody with that background and had that amount of time. Personally, one of the things I've always missed since I started writing larger pieces would be to have that kind of a dialogue back and forth. What I do get are a comment or a question from somebody, and then I replay that in my own head, but then you're in an echo chamber. And that makes it hard. So if one can find somebody and have that kind of relationship, one, I would love to have it, and two, I just think it's super important, but it's difficult to find.
And now we're paid up on workers' comp, right, in case I keep going across these? Okay,
So my comment is about something Dan said, and that was, you mentioned some inherent bias that occurred in a situation, and I too grew up in a almost all-white northwest suburb of Chicago, Hoffman Estates, and so some of you may know that. So my family had bought the 16th house built in Hoffman Estates, had been there a long time, And then I went to an almost all-white St. Olaf College in Minnesota, and I so often incurred the exact same feeling that there was an inherent bias just in how I was raised, in terms of benefits I had. It's not that we had laptops back then, but in my adult life, I lived in a suburb of Richmond, and one end of one county where we were, it was all white, very wealthy, and the other end was mostly black and very poor and single parents, etc. And you could just absolutely see and feel the inherent bias in some of the statements that people made sometimes. I could not wait to leave living in the Richmond area. So when you made that comment, that resonated with me. That absolutely exists big time. And a lot of people just don't see it. They don't get it. If I make a comment the opposite of what they're thinking, they just can't comprehend that it's there. So anyway, that resonated with me.
More resonations. Is that a word? No. It is not. Resonations now. Okay.
Felt obligated. I guess my comment or what resonated with me was with Alicia, with the poet, and your struggle to describe what you see. And you're talking about the leaves of the birch. And that's a struggle for me as well. Just to form, color, balance, rhythm, all of those sort of artistic elements that are needed to describe a landscape. And it's difficult, and I think one reason is that our culture is not indigenous to this land, and I think cultures that are indigenous or have spent 1,000 or more years in a place do develop words that really are very precise. And they're precise in form, they're precise in function, and their culture knows, they know those words. And so we've brought a language to this land that's not really somewhat in tune, because, Europe, where our culture primarily comes from, has some of the same seasonality and some of the same vegetation and forms and so on. But we are new to this land, and I don't know exactly how we become indigenous, in a short period of time. And maybe it's through intensity of experience. I don't know, maybe that compresses the learning experience. I'm not sure, but anyway, that resonated with me when you talked about your struggle, because I, sort of have that same struggle. So thanks for mentioning that.
Thank you. I have a go here first. We're on that track because she's had it in the fight for a while. Thank you. You're welcome.
My name is Lee, and this question is for Anne. You said what resonated very strongly with me is that writers can be a conscience. And I felt that it was a powerful statement, Anne. And I wondered if it came through in your book with Maggie's journal writing. And it was such a good technique, but I reflected on the way you expressed what she was feeling and thinking, but it was in the form of a journal entry in the story, in this historical novel. And I wondered if that was what you might be thinking of, but if you could express, how can a writer be a conscience for the ones you're writing for? Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for picking up on that. I think the things I care about are, I think the things any of us care about as writers, those come across. So I cared about some of the issues that my Maggie cares about. So I think you're very perceptive that that's probably it was probably me speaking when Maggie was speaking about the things that bothered her about our culture or, so yes, and I think it's what Dan said too. We want our readers to have an emotion evoked. But I think most of us as writers are hoping that we're pricking a conscience. We're asking our readers to look at themselves and say, am I racist? To look at ourselves and say, could I have handled that situation? Or look at this character who's surviving this adversity. How could that relate to me? What is our society doing that sometimes we can see better from fiction than we can from real life? So I think there's many ways. I mean, poets especially, I think, are asking readers to see what's wrong and what could be different and what could be better.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more, or? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Make the long.
If you want to skip it, that's not right.
No.
Do not. Took me the whole session to say And to the weaver.
Yeah, I'll have to take your yarn home because I'm a fiber artist. So I'm a fiber artist, and I'm starting this collaboration with a stand-up poet. And so he's been writing these hilarious poems about my fiber art. For example, I did 2 large tractor rim tapestries, and he wrote a poem as if he was the rim. And the reason why he did this was because at one point, I forgot I even told him this, that people tend to drop off found objects at my gallery, and then I use them. So he started this poem with, all of a sudden, I found myself on this deck. I didn't know why I ended up here. It goes on like this. But next winter, when I return to Guatemala, I have to do a visual tapestry of his poems. Funny poems, but very good poems. And I'm wondering, do you have any advice, especially you, with how to approach this? I do see an image when I read his poetry. I always see an image. But there's got to be more I should be looking for.
I love this.
I love collaboration, so this sounds really exciting. And I think, as many panelists have said here today, it's often about emotion. And as a fiber artist, I'm sure you know that color is emotion. So it's like I've written poems for visual art, and you don't want to just copy it. You want to have a conversation with it. So as you are reading his poems, think about the conversation you're having, what it's evoking in you, and if there is an image that comes up, or just a feeling or a color or a shape, just believe that and go with it. And I'm really excited. I want to see what happens.
So thank you, everyone. But I just wanted you to look at our sometimes difficult matrix. And this is a visual of the connection in the conversation that we had this evening. So we ran out of time, but we would have had connections to every single seat in here. But this, if you think of nothing else, this is the number of times that you were able to make a connection with the panel that was up here. And I just want to say thank you, Anne, for understanding that accuracy is important even in fiction. That part really resonated with me. Jeannie, I'm not musical at all, but I loved that to you the words came first, and the musicality of the words really made it before the music. So that was really very interesting to me. Erika, for your courage. It takes tremendous courage to write the kind of book you wrote. And what you went through doing that, only you know. But the number of people that you have helped with that book, you probably also, unfortunately, don't know either. But Dan, thank you for your honesty. You gave a very honest account of your journey. And Alessandra, your perseverance. I mean, you have children, an editing job, you write for a newspaper, you work on a farm. It takes perseverance to be a writer because most of the time it's just hard. It never ever comes really easy. Those times are certainly blessed, but so thank you for your perseverance. That's what resonated with me. And thank you all for your questions and for participating and for going along with the yarn thing. Thank you.